Hello, my name's Elizabeth Hopkinson. I'm a writer from Bradford, and I'm the author of Asexual Fairy Tales and its forthcoming sequel, Asexual Myths and Tales. As you've guessed, I am asexual. I'm a romantic asexual, which means that I feel romance very strongly, but not any sexual desire, and I'm what they sometimes call sex repulsed, although I don't really like that term. But yes, it's definitely no desire. Romance, but no sex. That's the way I see it, and I know it's a very wide spectrum, so that's not at all how it is for many other people, but that's how it is for me, and that's my experience that I am trying to express through these two books. I didn't identify until I was in my late 30s, early 40s, grew up without the internet, which has made a massive difference to asexuals discovering their own identity and each other. But even before I really understood what it was about me that I was trying to get to grips with, myths and fairy tales was something that spoke to me and seemed to make a bit of sense of what I was. Stories like the myth of Daphne, of Pygmalion, fairy tales such as the glass coffin in Grimm's fairy tales, and Princess Kaguya in Yae Theodore Ozaki's Japanese fairy tales. And I wanted to gather together some of the tales that meant a lot to me, along with some original tales that I'd written myself and had previously been published in other magazines and anthologies, when I put together this book of asexual fairy tales. This is The Ice Queen and the Mer King from my book, Asexual Fairy Tales. It's an original fairy tale that I wrote myself at a time before I'd identified and when I was struggling to understand my identity and put it into words. And the language of fairy tales seemed the most natural to use because I find it much easier to express things symbolically than I do straight on. And I've always been drawn to women in tower stories. The tower can represent many things. It can represent inviolate self-protection, social anxiety, frustration, lack of choice. And one of the stories I've always been drawn to, and one of the characters I've identified with from a young age, is Alfred Tennyson's The Lady of Shalott, who is a classic woman in a tower. This story is partly inspired by that, also partly inspired by Matthew Arnold's The Forsaken Merman, which is based on a Scandinavian folk tale about a woman and a merman. But this is The Ice Queen and the Mer King. There was once, so the story goes, a king who subdued the surrounding nations with the might of his sword, and all feared him. And when he had conquered the nations to the west and the south, he made war on the Icemen, who ruled the frozen wasteland to the north beyond the mountains. Then there was battle on the plains of ice for many days, but the soldiers of the warrior king outnumbered the Icemen with their sparkling javelins, and the plains fell. For a prize of war, the king from the south demanded the elder daughter of the Ice Prince for his wife. He carried her away captive to his home among the heathlands and the rushing rivers, and he made her his queen. Never in all his days had the king seen such a rare beauty as the Ice Princess from the frozen waste. Her skin shone and glittered in the sun. Some say the sun shone right through it, leaving rainbows in every room through which she passed. Her eyes were as blue as a clear sky on a January morning, and each delicate strand of her flowing hair was made from a single icicle. Too rare and too delicate was the new queen for the palace of the king within his fortified city. He could not regale her in the mighty feast hall of his fathers, where the trophies of war hung above the great fireplace, and unspeakable desires burned in the eyes of his warriors and chieftains. He could not promenade her in the scented gardens, where the daughters of the ancient houses whispered by the trellises, and the jealous sun winked maliciously from behind the clouds. So the king took his queen of ice and locked her in the upper room of a tower. It stood on an island in a coastal bay, where the great river flowing from the mountains made the dark and changeable sea. Here she remained, looking out from her window at night as the waves crashed and tumbled, singing a lament in the cold, chiming tongue of her people. Her breath as she sang was like clouds of snowflakes falling in a mist. It fell slowly to meet the restless surface of the sea, each flake for one moment a glistening star before it was gone forever. Each week the king would unlock the door of the queen's chamber with an iron key and bring her down to the room beneath her own, a cold room with gloomy tapestries and a panelled bed. There he would embrace her roughly, and with each embrace one icicle strand of the queen's hair would break off and fall to the ground with a crash. When the king was gone, the queen, returning to her chamber, would weep and mourn the breaking of her delicate hair, shedding hailstone tears. These too would fall into the night, and the wind would carry them away into the heart of the sea. Now beneath the waves that roared about the island lay the kingdom of the merfolk. For long centuries beyond the accounting of men, they had ruled the ocean depths. But unlike the king above the surface were they, because they ruled with equity and not by the sword. Although their king wielded the tridents, and the power of the waves was at his command, he used it but seldom. He took counsel among the lords of the merfolk, and understood the ways of the many creatures that swim the unseen depths, and the pulse of the ocean was the beating of his own heart. So it happened that as the merfolk feasted at night upon thrones of pearl, and shared the fellowship cup together in their coral gardens, they looked far above them and saw the glittering of stars. It seemed to them that there were constellations in the heavens. Each star gleamed for one moment, and then went dark as another appeared, as unlike the first as it was unlike the next. Magical and mysterious to the lords of the sea were the stars that were the breath of the Ice Queen. It happened also that as they swam in clear lagoons beyond the knowledge of mariners, pearls fell softly through the sea towards them, no bigger than the scales of the tiniest fish. But when they tried to touch the pearls that were the Ice Queen's tears, they melted in their hands. And the king of the merfolk declared that they should all swim up to the surface to see what these marvels were that came to them from the world of air. So they rose together at night upon the back of a wave, singing their haunting songs. There in the window of the tower they saw the Ice Queen, with her clear blue eyes, weeping into the night. The queen looked through her tears and beheld the merfolk riding the waves, and their hair blowing about them in the windy nights. She lifted up her voice and sang mournfully in the chiming tongue she had learned beyond the mountains. Then the merfolk were glad, for they saw again those stars beneath the stars that had glittered on the surface of the sea. But the deep green eyes of their king were thoughtful and sad. Long into the night, the Ice Queen and the merfolk sang together in a strange and mysterious harmony. At last, as the first light of day showed pale upon the mountain tops, the merfolk turned and dived into the sea with the splashing of their powerful tails. From that night onwards the lords of the sea would rise often from their thrones to sing with the Ice Queen. All along the rocks they would sit, the jewels of the ocean gleaming wet on their blue-green breasts, and from high in the window the snowflakes of the Ice Queen's breath would flutter around their heads. All the while the deep green eyes of the Mer-King were fixed on the lonely Ice Queen, with her rainbow-white skin and her beautiful broken hair. So it came to be that the King of the Sea conceived in his heart a love for the Queen in the tower, and she, looking down at his noble face, wise with the changeable mysteries of the sea, also felt the pangs of love for the very first time. At that time their love was a secret, locked deep in the heart of each. The silence between them could not be broken, for the language of the Ice Queen was as strange to the merfolk as theirs was to her. But as one night gave way to another, so they gradually came to understand one another, and to speak as well as to sing together. The Ice Queen told the Mer people of her home in the frozen north, of the glittering palaces of crystal with many turrets, and the sleighs drawn by white reindeer that once carried her through frozen forests of silver glass. She told of the battles with the king from the south, and of how he had carried her away, far from her home and all she loved, and the tiny pearls of her hailstone tears rained into the ocean. The Mer King told her of the gardens beneath the sea, where fish of 1,000 colours swim through endless grasses. He told her of the hearts of those who rule the sea, which are gentle and loving towards the tiniest creature that floats there, and beneath the moon and the stars their talk became ever more tender. Now the Queen dreaded more than ever the turning of the iron key, and she wept more bitterly at the roughness that broke the icicle strands of her hair. Each time the king summoned her downstairs, she feared that he would see the heart of the ocean beginning to creep into her blue eyes. All that consoled her was the coming of the night and the pounding of the waves. Then one day, when she felt she could endure no more, the king did not appear at his appointed hour. Instead, the squire who held his horse came to tell her that the king had fallen in battle to the warlike princes of the scattered isles, and would visit her no more. Then the iron lock was broken, and the Queen walked for the first time on the grass and rocks of the island, and sang a song of freedom that swirled in frosty clouds about her. The song of the Ice Queen pierced the sea, and came to the ears of those who sat on thrones of pearl. That night the Mer King rose from his ocean kingdom alone, and his wave lashed at the rock like thunder. In his hand he held a necklace of coral, with a jewel that glowed with every colour under the sea. He held it out to the Ice Queen with words of love, and humbly begged that she would come back with him to the kingdom of the merfolk, and sit beside him for ever. Now the heart of the Ice Queen was filled with pain. She said to the Mer King, "I love you more than all the crystals of the silver forest, but in your kingdom I should dissolve away to nothingness. Where you swim I cannot follow, except in my heart." And though the salt of the ocean came to the Mer King's eyes, he knew that it was true. "Then let me take you to your father," he said. "We shall make for you a carriage pulled by rays, and bring you to the foot of the snowy mountains." "No," said the Ice Queen. "I cannot now return to my father's house, with my hair snapped and broken, and the heart of the ocean in my eyes. I shall remain here on this island, and this tower, once my prison, shall become my home. I shall weave from the grass and the seaweed new tapestries, that the generations to come may not forget me." Then the Mer King delicately kissed the hand of the Ice Queen and dived back into the sea. The necklace of coral he lay in a pool on the rock, and the Queen picked it up and put it around her neck. It melted a small patch over her heart, for it was wet with the sea, but she never removed it. Every day for as long as she lived, she wove tapestries for the walls of her tower, and every night she would stand on the rocks and sing, and mariners would see from far off the mingling of the snowflakes with the spray, which was the love of the Ice Queen for the Mer King.